Good afternoon. I do hope everyone is doing well today. My topic has been to look at and assess the effectiveness of the strategic bombing campaign of Germany during the Second World War. For this week's discussion, we were supposed to research some articles that would hopefully prove relevant to our topic. The three articles that I wanted to discuss in this board is the first one is Kenneth Worrell's The Strategic Bombing of Germany in World War II, Cost and Accomplishments. Worrell is one of the preeminent historians in aviation history, and he's written many papers looking at strategic bombing. And he does eventually conclude that strategic bombing did have limited success, especially toward the end of the war, and it did hamper Germany's war-making abilities. But in this article, where he looks at the costs of the war, he's not looking at a monetary cost. He's looking at the cost and how many men were lost. He's looking at the cost of how many planes were lost. He's looking at, how many sorties had to be flown in order to effectively bomb a target. He's looking at the number of bombs that are being dropped, and of course his conclusions that it was extremely high price in both men and materials and machines in order to even meet the limited success that it did. The other article, or the second article, is Gentile Advocacy or Assessment, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey of Germany and Japan. What Gentile does is he looks at how did the strategic bombing survey conducted after the war, how did it assess the effectiveness of strategic bombing? Was it accurate or not accurate? Gentile argues that for the survey was reasonably accurate. It did gloss over some things. It did kind of inflate the numbers a little bit on its effectiveness, because the survey does argue that strategic bombing was indeed effective and played a significant role in the war. But also Gentile points out there was a lot of information that the assessment did not have, that a lot of the information that did not come out until years after the war, years after the survey had been conducted. So in many ways, the survey had been revised on the effectiveness of strategic bombing. However, as Gentile said, for what they had at the time, for all the information they had, that it was fairly accurate, though it could have been probably a little bit better. The third one is Meldon Smith, The Strategic Bombing Debate, the Second World War and Vietnam. Now, in this one, Meldon doesn't really offer up his own conclusions on the effectiveness of the war for World War II, but he's presenting the debates on the effectiveness of the war. He's looking at it from the standpoint of those historians who argue that strategic bombing just was not effective, that it failed of its purpose. He presents the view of others who say, well, yes, it did have its effectiveness, that it was more effective than most people believe, and that it did significantly hamper Germany's war-making ability. And of course, even looking at those historians who kind of take things in the middle, that do argue that there is some effectiveness. It was very limited, but it wasn't as effective as the advocates of strategic bombing had really wanted. So these are the three articles that I were looking at. It does approach the effectiveness, the assessing of strategic bombing from three different ideas. But these all three do play into my thesis, into my dissertation, and I think could be very helpful. Thank you for your time and for listening to me, and I hope everyone has a great and wonderful day. Goodbye.